Ooh, time to talk about books. Hi, I have a stack of books here, and they are all science fiction, mostly except for one, which might be the best one. First up is Beyond Tomorrow, an anthology of modern science fiction edited by Lee Harding, who notably is Australian. And I guess the thing here is they wanted to sandwich in some Australian authors amongst better-known writers from America and the UK to try to get them some publicity because Australian science fiction is pretty underexposed. There are some standouts here. There are some real duds. Unfortunately, the Australian material is very duddy. A lot of filler, pretty weak stuff, unfortunately. The standout is 9 Lives by Ursula Le Guin. That's by far the best story in here. It's up there, probably top 5 science fiction short stories that I've read. It's about these two frenemies who live on a mining world, and they are joined by a team of clones who are like this gestalt entity because they're all identical or nearly completely identical people. It's a story about nature and nurture. It's a story about friendship. It's a story about consciousness. Incredibly potent, powerful, dark, weird writing. This is Le Guin really at her absolute best. I think that Le Guin here is snappier, sharper, more concise, more focused than in the big Baroque political science fiction novels like Dispossessed and Left Hand. And I have a copy of Wind's 12 Quarters behind me, which is a collection of her science fiction and fantasy short stories that is pretty high on my list to read. Turns out not all of her short stories are created equally. However, this one is masterpiece. I will use that slightly overused word. The Oath by James Blish is about a post-apocalyptic doctor trying to recruit doctors from out in the wastelands or like medicine men and women to come to an urban center to work for this provisional government on behalf of the common good. And it's a very Blishian sort of academic conflict story between two visions of the ethical obligations of people in medicine. It's a story about the Hippocratic Oath. It's pretty Blishian, but it's pretty good, at least to me. Mother Hitton's Little Kittens by Cordwainer Smith, one of the most disturbing stories, not just from Smith, but period, that I've read in science fiction. Smith is an interesting case because when you get outside of Australia, is what I'm saying here, is what I'm getting at, his stuff is just remarkably grotesque and dark. He's not considered in the same breath as people like Lovecraft or Howard, the weird fiction guys, or horror writers. His stuff is more disturbing to me in a lot of cases than most horror writers. A good example of this is Mother Hitton's Little Kittens. Another one is Think Blue Act 2. And then J.G. Ballard's The Garden of Time is the final story, and a really interesting one about time control. This married couple living in a mansion who are witnessing cycles of a horde of people coming over the horizon. And every time they pick a certain kind of flower in their garden, it reverses time. And they're running out of flowers. Pretty interesting stuff. I enjoyed this. Probably 9 Lives and Mother Hitton's Little Kittens are the two best. The next one is Orsinian Tales by Le Guin. I was all hopped up to read this because of 9 Lives. And I thought, as many readers probably thought, that this was going to be fantasy short stories. No, my friend. This is historical fiction, a lot of which are set in a fictitious Eastern European country called Orsinia. And this is just not the same Le Guin. This I found pretty indulgent. There's a couple of stories in here that I liked. The only one that I really remember is The Barrow, which is the second story, the one that the cover art is derived from. That verges on fantasy. That's not the only rubric that I apply to fiction. I do not demand that it be genre fiction, but I found the rest of it sort of, like I said, indulgent, a little bit purple, a little predictable, and a little formulaic. It's these sort of like tortured love stories, these Romeo and Juliet tales. I found this, frankly, a little bit boring. Fault Lines by Kate Wilhelm, however, I think is excellent. This is the first Kate Wilhelm that I've read. It is, by most measures, science fiction. I don't know how much I really care about that particular slide rule of designating what is and is not science fiction. It is a notoriously thorny subject. There are many countervailing critical theories about what is and what isn't. I'm happy to actually say that this is science fiction because it is fiction that is about science, or it's fiction that portrays science as a readout of emotionally incapable people, or that the scientific method, the scientific view of the world is a way to abdicate certain like moral or spiritual responsibilities towards your own like internal life, your own sense of history, your own relationships. And it's about a woman living in the Bay Area who is trapped under rubble in the wake of an earthquake. And as her health declines and she encroaches on death, she recounts episodes from her own life, retreads old romantic relationships and familial relationships, having lived a life as an iconoclast in defiance of gender norms during the 20th century, where she pursued a career as a magazine editor and a patron of the arts, and was resilient in the face of a lot of social pressure to marry. I think this is an excellent book. Chamiel by Edward Pearson is a book with a really cool cover, and it sucks and is bad. It's Christian fiction that reads like, I think it was meant as a juvenile, and I'm not averse to Christian fiction necessarily. There are a lot of books that I've reviewed that I consider Christian fiction. Just because it is Christian fiction doesn't mean that it is poor fiction. This, however, is bad. This reads like a Sunday school pamphlet. It's about a guy who goes to a world where there's the devil. Who gives a shit? I don't. This, however, superb. Vermillion Sands by J.G. Ballard. J.G. Ballard, I think, is the steepest slope that I have to climb as someone who tries to articulate thoughts about books. I feel outmatched by Ballard in a similar way that I feel outmatched by people like Malzberg or Joanna Russ. And that's a feeling that I really sort of cherish. There are certain authors who I just find stymieing. Sometimes I feel that way about Stanislav Lem. Like I tried to read A Perfect Vacuum, which is a collection of fictitious reviews of fake books. And there's a certain pitch, there's a certain level. It is beyond my level, I think. It inspires in me both confusion and befuddlement and frustration. Stuff like this, stuff like Crash, stuff like The Drought, and stuff from those other authors that I named, it creates feelings of confusion and discombobulation that's coupled with a sense of appreciation and celebration. And I feel that way about Vermillion Sands. It's a short story collection that sort of reminds me of, oh my God, what's the Ray Bradbury Mars book? Holy shit. Come on, book filled. Oh! I'm not looking at the phone. What is it? What is it? What is it? Martian Chronicle? Yes. It's a midway point between like The Drought and The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. And this is not the Ballard of the apocalypse. This is Leisure Ballard. It's about a half-dilapidated resort city called Vermillion Sands. And it's sort of like if Palm Springs was also Arrakis. Depending on which story you read, there are varying degrees of confabulation into like a far future Earth where there are different animals that have evolved weirdly and technology has hyper advanced, almost to the point of it feeling like a dying Earth setting. But it's also near future where it's really like a set of social stories about especially romantic relationships, and this is typical of Ballard's fascination with sexually prolific and simultaneously sexually disappointed white-collar middle-aged men, following them through their many love affairs and encounters with witchy, mysterious women who are mostly dangerous, and there's a conspicuous recurrence of that, like a uniformity to that theme in the stories that I think is slightly annoying, but really strange, otherworldly, ethereal, and quite beautiful, and at times funny. And I think that if you've encountered Ballard before, especially in the Urban Disaster trilogy, and you bounced off of him, you couldn't jive with the sort of ambient, like horror and hostility in his writing, then Vermillion Sands might actually be a good candidate. This is not my favorite Ballard, but it's not far behind my 2 or 3 favorite Ballards, and I love it. Flow My Tears, The Policeman Said by Philip K. Dick is a book from 1970, if I remember correctly, and I would actually categorize it as cyberpunk. And, 1974 originally. I called it on a Patreon review disco punk, and that's a term that I'm really proud of, and so I'm going to say it again. It's about a television mega celebrity who wakes up in a hotel room without any belongings, without any identification, and his reputation has been wiped out of the world somehow. Nobody knows who he is. And the United States has become a police state governed by 2 counterposed police authorities arising out of civil conflict on college campuses. Life is constrained by an overwhelming police presence and checkpoints everywhere. And how will he live? And it delivers on what PKD is really great at, this sense of like life under political tyranny, this sense of paranoia, and those things married with reality bending and also the really cool, like sort of half kitschy aesthetics of just like proto-cyberpunk stuff, proto-cyberpunk. And this one has a surprising preponderance of BDSM imagery. There's a lot in here that's quite sexually graphic, and it feels like fairly edgy. That's my memory of this book. It's not a perfect book. It's not my favorite PKD, but I feel that it's definitely one of the better offerings that I've read from him. This book is amazing, Kill the Dead by Tanith Lee. Fairly / completely obscure fantasy, standalone book that I think is just wonderful. Tanith Lee, God, is she my favorite fantasy author? Well, according to my own top 15, no, she isn't. But I think that she is the most consistent fantasy author. The novel's about this guy named Paul Dro, who is a notorious ghost hunter in this world, this like typical fantasy medieval world where ghosts are understood to be real, and people hang on to ghosts because of their past attachment to the people while they were still alive, despite the fact that ghosts vampirically feed off of the life force of the living. So Paul Dro wanders the countryside dispatching these ghosts in spite of the wishes of the living to the contrary. So Paul Dro is generally despised and distrusted. And Paul Dro meets this minstrel with whom his destiny becomes entwined, especially by way of a particular ghost that Paul Dro seeks to do away with. And it gets into Paul Dro's backstory and this minstrel's backstory, and it is an incredibly gorgeous, melancholic, and dark and meaningful examination of really these 2 characters and an examination of like these broken adults, broken by things that happened to them in childhood. And it's, I think, really a book that's about people's emotional attachments to their own childhood, the legacy of sorrows from when we're young. And it's just such a wonderful little book, and one among many Tanith Lee books that I think is completely underserved by Tanith Lee's obscurity. There's also just cool-ass ghosts in this, and it rules, and I love this book. Kalimantan by Lucius Shepard is a mess. As it so turns out, this is not one of his better-known books, and a book that is disclaimed by a lot of Lucius Shepard fans. His big ones are The Jaguar Hunter and Life During Wartime. It's a novella. Kalimantan is a novella, and it's bundled with 2 short stories, Solitario's Eyes and the Arsivwalo. The short stories are great. Lucius Shepard is sometimes seemingly half accusatorily characterized as magical realism as much or more than he is characterized as a science fiction writer. Again, how many pedants can dance on the head of this pin? Kalimantan takes place on Borneo. Kalimantan is another name for Borneo. And it's a story, it's sort of a retelling of Heart of Darkness, about an American man who winds up being a useful idiot for warring political factions and corporate interests on the island, and is rescued by this, I think he's French. No, he's British. A British shopkeeper who sends him to live with an old, physically incapable Dutchman out in the jungle. And this American discovers an herbal remedy, like this psychotropic plant medicine that allows him to phase into an alternate reality. And it's very roughly an allegory for colonialism on the island, represented by the 3 main characters, different colonial forces throughout the history of Borneo. It just doesn't really work. It's a piece of fiction. It kind of rollicks along under this sort of crazy momentum that doesn't exactly know where it's going, and it relies upon what I would consider Orientalist premises or assumptions. The basic ethic of the story, the basic moral caution of the story is that white Westerners should not underestimate the Asian mind, I think is the point. The unknowable Asian mind. Solitario's Eyes and the other one, what is it? It's a Portuguese word, Arsivwalo. I'm sure that I'm not saying that right. Are, however, great. Binti by Nnedi Okorafor, unfortunately, I found very lacking. Binti is the name of the protagonist, who's a girl from the Himba tribe in Namibia, who is given, I think, a scholarship or is invited to attend this university off-planet, and she will be the first of her people to leave Earth, which involves potentially a seeming betrayal of her cultural roots or a feeling of betrayal of her culture and her family. And she's put in this situation where she is a fish out of water and is treated unkindly by the other passengers on this ship that's en route to this university. And on the way, there's an ambush by a race of hostile, squid, jellyfish, aliens, who kill everybody except for her. Okay premise. There's a few conceits in there that I think are sort of interesting, but I just found the writing rather poor. I just didn't find it that good, unfortunately. And then, likewise, The Anything Box by Zenna Henderson. My first Henderson, and these stories are mostly from the 1950s, a couple from the very early 1960s. And I would again compare this to Ray Bradbury, and it's a sort of soft, gentle, sentimental set of science fantasy stories that center around a couple of themes. One is the importance of imagination in adult life, and especially the power of imagination in the life of children. And there are a lot of instances of women serving important and underappreciated roles in larger plots that adhere to gender norms of the 1950s. I frankly found most of this stuff pretty boring and a little bit dated, and I don't, again, need everything to be suffused with BDSM imagery to be interesting, but too gentle, too slow, too soft. There wasn't a whole lot there to hold my attention. There were a couple that I thought were all right. There were a couple that I thought were pretty silly. The Grunder stands out, I think, as maybe the silliest. Walking Aunt Dade, I think, is my favorite. It's about a zombie who has been in the family for multiple generations for reasons unknown. Creepy story. I thought that was quite good. When Zenna Henderson writes horror, I think that she's sharper than when she writes this sort of like soft focus science fantasy stuff or science fiction stuff. For me as a reader in 2025, I don't know. I just didn't. I didn't really jive with it. It's certainly not like bad, most of it, but I found it a little bit generic. 10 books for that ass. Thanks for watching, and I hope everybody's spirits are up and you're doing all right. Cheers, and I'll see you on the next one.